The first sound Beatrice Harcourt heard after Lady Cressida Vale entered. The dining room was not the scrape of a chair or the murmur of astonishment, but the soft, unmistakable click of pearls against a woman's collarbone. It was a small sound, almost delicate, yet it struck the long table at Wexham House with more force than a shouted accusation. London had gathered beneath the painted ceiling of the Duke of Wexham's dining room on a damp April evening in 1843, all candlelight, silver, crystal, and controlled hunger. The footmen stood in powdered stillness along the walls. The guests sat beneath the glow of chandeliers that made every wineglass burn like a captured ruby. At the head of the table, Gideon Harcourt, Duke of Wexham, looked as cold and handsome as the portraits of his ancestors. His dark evening coat cut with severe perfection, his expression arranged for command. At the other end, Beatrice sat with the silver household keys resting against the waist of her ivory gown, the pearl fob cool against her wrist whenever she moved. Those keys had belonged to every Duchess of Wexham for more than a century. They opened linen presses, jewel cabinets, wine cupboards, still rooms, private desks, and the 1,000 small arteries through which a great house breathed. They meant trust. They meant authority. They meant that, whatever a husband felt in private, the house acknowledged its duchess. Until that evening, Beatrice had believed there were humiliations one could survive by sitting very straight. Then Lady Cressida came in wearing her pearls. Not merely pearls, the Wexham pearls, 3 pale strands, old as scandal and luminous as moonlight, clasped at Cressida's throat with the diamond fastening shaped like a tiny ducal coronet. Beatrice knew every inch of them. She had worn them once, on the day after her wedding, when the old housekeeper had fastened them with trembling hands and whispered that her grace looked born to them. Since then, they had remained locked in the jewel cabinet, because Gideon had never asked her to wear them again. Cressida paused just inside the doorway, beside her companion, Mrs. Davenant, who carried propriety like a borrowed shawl. A dozen faces lifted. A spoon stopped halfway to Lady Fenwick's mouth. Sir Alistair Mowbray blinked as if someone had changed the language of the room. Beatrice did not move. Across the table, Gideon's gaze dropped to Cressida's throat. For one breath, the Duke of Wexham forgot to be unreadable. His hand tightened around the stem of his glass. That was all. It was not enough. "Your Grace," Cressida said, lowering herself into a curtsy, so graceful it seemed rehearsed before a mirror. Her voice was honeyed with apology, but her eyes went first to Gideon, then to Beatrice. "I fear Mrs. Davenant and I are unforgivably late." The streets were dreadful. "Not dreadful enough to prevent an entrance," Lady Fenwick murmured, then pretended to cough into her napkin. A flicker of amusement travelled along the table and died before reaching Gideon. He stood. Every gentleman followed. Beatrice remained seated because a duchess did not leap from her chair at a wound. She let the room witness the wound land. "Lady Cressida," Gideon said, his tone dangerously even, "you should have sent word." "I did, Your Grace." Cressida's smile trembled in precisely the right place. Perhaps the note went astray. It has been that sort of day. She touched the pearls lightly, as if to steady herself. The gesture was almost tender. Beatrice felt the tiny brush of her own keys against her gown, a quiet answer from metal to pearl. Mrs. Davenant took the chair offered by a footman. Cressida accepted the place to Gideon's right, a place Beatrice had not assigned her. Beatrice had arranged the table herself that afternoon with the calm efficiency expected of a duchess. She had placed Cressida midway down the table, among widows and married ladies, where no whisper could easily sharpen into rumor. Someone had changed the card. No, not someone. Someone inside her house. A footman approached Beatrice with the next course. She gave the smallest nod, and he served as if the room had not shifted beneath them all. Her fingers remained loose in her lap. She had learned the discipline of stillness during 3 years of marriage to a man who respected her manners more often than he noticed her heart. Gideon had never been cruel in the ordinary ways. He did not shout. He did not mock. He did not stagger home drunk or parade vulgarity through drawing rooms. His neglect had been finer than that, polished until it looked like duty. He consulted her about guest lists, charities, household arrangements, and county obligations. He praised her efficiency to others as one might praise a clock that never lost time. Yet when Lady Cressida wrote too often, visited too freely, laughed too softly at his side, he allowed society to supply the name he would not. Mistress. The word had never been spoken at Wexham House. It had only breathed there. Now it sat at his right hand, wearing Beatrice's pearls. "My dear Duchess," Cressida said, leaning forward enough for the candlelight to wake every pearl on her throat. "You are very pale. I hope I haven't distressed you." A lesser woman might have asked for the jewels back. A younger woman might have flushed or trembled or looked to her husband for rescue. Beatrice did none of these things. "Not at all," she said. Her voice was smooth enough to make Lady Fenwick look up in surprise. "I was only admiring how boldly some ladies wear what does not belong to them." The silence that followed was so complete that the fire seemed impertinent for crackling. Cressida's lips parted. A tiny wash of color rose beneath her powdered cheeks. Gideon's eyes came to Beatrice then, fully and sharply, as if he had only just remembered she could bleed. "Beatrice," he said, "not your Grace, not Duchess, her name." It was almost an intimacy. It arrived too late. "Is there some misunderstanding?" Mrs. Davenant asked, her voice fluttering like a trapped ribbon. Lady Cressida understood the pearls were sent with her Grace's kindness. "Did she?" Beatrice asked. She looked down the length of the table at Gideon. "How generous I have become without knowing it." Gideon's jaw tightened. "We will discuss this after dinner." There it was, this command beneath the polished tone. Later, privately, quietly, the language of men who wished women to bear public wounds and accept private bandages. Beatrice folded her napkin once, then again, taking care with the corners. The guests watched her hands because no one wished to be caught, watching her face. She felt strangely calm now. Pain, when it became clear enough, could have the shape of instruction. The silver keys at her waist were heavier than they had been an hour before. She touched the pearl fob, worn smooth by generations of women who had governed Wexham House, while dukes made speeches in Parliament, rode over estates, collected rents, and called their neglect responsibility. Her mother had once told her that a duchess survived by knowing which doors were hers to open, and which doors she must never beg before. Beatrice had forgotten that. Cressida had reminded her. "No," Beatrice said. Gideon went still. "No, no, Your Grace. We will not discuss this after dinner." A breath moved around the table. Someone's fork touched china with a faint, guilty sound. Beatrice rose. Every gentleman rose with her because rank required what kindness had not. The motion sent the keys at her waist into a soft silver chime. Gideon's eyes dropped to them. For the first time that evening, unease crossed his face without disguise. Beatrice unhooked the key ring slowly. The pearl fob swung once against her gloved palm. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rowley, stood near the sideboard, her face colourless. The butler stared straight ahead with the desperate dignity of a man watching disaster and etiquette collide. Beatrice placed the keys beside her untouched wineglass. The sound was small, silver against polished mahogany, yet it travelled farther than any scream could have done. "Your Grace," Gideon said, and this time the title sounded like a plea he had not meant to reveal. Beatrice looked at him, not at Cressida. "A house cannot have two duchesses," she said, "and a wife cannot be expected to govern what her husband permits another woman to dishonour." Cressida's hand flew to the pearls. "That's monstrous. I didn't steal anything." "I did not say you stole them," Beatrice replied. "I said you wore them." Gideon stepped back from his chair. "Beatrice, don't leave this room." The contraction made the command sound almost human. Almost. Beatrice's heart moved once, painfully, toward the man she had once hoped might look at her as something more than the suitable answer to an ancient family requirement. Then she remembered his silence when Cressida crossed the threshold. She remembered the place card moved. She remembered 3 years of being thanked for her usefulness and starved of tenderness. "You ask me to remain silent," she said softly. "I have done so beautifully." No one stopped her as she turned from the table. The footmen lowered their eyes. Mrs. Rowley pressed one hand to her apron, as if the keys had been set upon her own chest. Beatrice walked past the portraits, past the candlelit mirrors, past Lady Cressida's perfume, and the guests held breaths. At the doorway, she paused just long enough for the room to understand she had not fled. She had withdrawn her consent. Behind her, Gideon said her name again. This time it did not command, it broke. Beatrice did not look back. She crossed the threshold and left the Duke of Wexham standing in his own dining room, with his rumoured mistress wearing the Duchess's pearls and the Duchess's keys lying cold beside an untouched glass of wine. Beatrice had reached the entrance hall before the first guest dared to speak behind her. The sound came faintly through the dining room doors, a low ripple of disbelief that broke apart the moment Gideon followed her out. Wexham House seemed larger beyond the warmth of the table. All marble floor, dark oil portraits, and lamps burning in glass globes along the walls. Her footsteps did not hurry. That steadiness cost her more than any sob would have done. Martha Pell, her maid, appeared from the shadow near the staircase, with a shawl over one arm, her young face stricken but obedient. Beatrice took the shawl and set it around her shoulders herself. Her fingers were cold inside her gloves. The place at her waist where the keys had rested felt strangely bare, as if a small piece of her body had been removed and left behind for everyone to stare at. "Your Grace," Martha whispered. "My cloak, please," Beatrice said. "And my bonnets. Nothing else tonight." The girl moved at once. She had served Beatrice long enough to know when a quiet voice meant there must be no argument. The butler stood near the front doors, with the rigid distress of a man whose entire training had failed to prepare him for a duchess, leaving her own house before the final course. "Send for my carriage," Beatrice said. "Not the ducal carriage. A hired carriage will do if one can be found nearby." "Your Grace, at this hour?" "At this hour?" "No," Gideon said behind her. The words struck the marble and stopped every servant from breathing. Beatrice turned. The Duke of Wexham stood beneath the great staircase. His face controlled again, but not perfectly. There was a thin break in the mask, visible only because she had spent 3 years studying that mask for any sign of a man beneath it. His dinner coat was immaculate. His eyes were not. "You will not take a hired carriage through London at night." Then have one of your footmen escort mine until we reach Lady Theodosia Marcham's house. Your aunt's townhouse? Yes. Beatrice, this is madness. The use of her name touched the air between them and fell uselessly to the floor. No, she said. Madness would be returning to that table and allowing Lady Cressida to finish the fish course while wearing the honor of this house at her throat. Gideon's mouth tightened. I did not give her those pearls. For one dangerous second, pain rose so sharply, Beatrice almost believed she had wanted exactly that denial. She had wanted him to say it, quickly, fiercely, before the whole room. She had wanted the words to arrive when they could still protect her. Now they came in the hall, after the guests had seen, after Cressida had smiled, after silence had done its work. Beatrice looked at him carefully. Your permission was not required. Your silence was enough. He flinched. It was small. It was real. I was trying to prevent a scandal. You were trying to postpone one. There is a difference. Yes. In the first, you protect the innocent. In the second, you ask the injured to stand quietly until the room is comfortable again. Martha returned with the cloak and bonnet. Her hands shook as she helped fasten them. Gideon saw the trembling. His gaze moved from the maid to Beatrice, and something like shame crossed his face. Martha is not to suffer for attending me, Beatrice said. No one will dismiss her. That is not your command tonight. No, he said quietly. It is mine. The answer should have comforted her. Instead, it only reminded her that he had always possessed the strength to speak when he chose. The front doors opened to a wet April night. The air smelled of rain, horses, and London smoke. A footman was already running down the steps to secure transport. Beatrice moved toward the threshold. Gideon came after her, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the force of him at her back. "Look at me," he said. The request was low enough that the servants could pretend not to hear. Beatrice turned again. "Did you know she would wear them?" he asked. "No." "Did you send them?" "You know I did not. I know what I believe. That is not the same thing." The words landed before she could soften them. Gideon's jaw shifted. "Then tell me what you need from me." It was the first honest question he had asked all evening. It came too late to change her leaving, but not too late to wound her further. Beatrice glanced toward the dining room doors, where the muted hush of their guests waited like a living creature. "I needed a husband at the table," she said, "not a duke managing inconvenience." The hired carriage arrived with an awkward scrape at the curb. It was plain, black, and damp from rain. Under any other circumstance, Gideon would never have permitted the Duchess of Wexham to enter it. Under this one, he seemed to understand that ordering her into his carriage would only prove her point. "I will send my carriage behind you," he said, discreetly. "Send a footman, not your carriage." "Beatrice, do not make protection look like possession tonight." He closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, his expression had changed. The command remained, but it had been leashed. "Very well." He turned to the nearest footman. "James, you will accompany Her Grace's carriage to Lady Theodosia Marcham's residence. You will remain outside until Lady Theodosia's man admits her. You will report back to me directly." The footman bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Beatrice stepped into the carriage with Martha after her. Before the door closed, Gideon put one gloved hand on the frame. He still did not touch her. It was the first restraint of his that did not feel like distance. "I will come to you in the morning." "No." His eyes sharpened. "No, you will not come in the morning. You will first discover how Lady Cressida entered my dining room wearing jewels locked in my cabinet, our cabinet." Not tonight. The door closed between them. Through the small square of glass, Beatrice saw him standing beneath the lamps of Wexham House as the carriage pulled away. He did not look like a man abandoned. He looked like a man who had just realized the door had been open for years, and he had mistaken her patience for permanence. Inside the carriage, Martha made a small sound and pressed a hand to her mouth. "I am sorry, Your Grace." Beatrice looked at the darkened streets sliding past, the rain making pale streaks on the window. "Do not be sorry for me yet. Are you frightened?" "Yes." The answer surprised them both. Beatrice folded her hands in her lap to still them. "But I am less frightened than I was at that table." Behind her, Wexham House shrank into the wet glitter of Mayfair. Ahead waited her aunt's townhouse, questions, gossip, and a night without the keys that had once made her useful. For the first time in 3 years, usefulness no longer felt like virtue. Back in the dining room, Gideon stood in the doorway until every guest saw that the Duke had returned without his Duchess. No one resumed eating. The candles had burned lower, the sauce congealed untouched on silver dishes. Lady Cressida sat very still at his right hand, one hand resting over the pearls as though they might protect her. Gideon walked to his place at the head of the table. He did not sit, every eye followed him. "This dinner is concluded," he said. Lady Fenwick inhaled. Sir Alister stared at his wine. Mrs. Davenant looked as if she hoped to disappear into the wallpaper. Cressida rose halfway. "Your Grace, surely that is unnecessary. Her Grace is distressed, and I would never wish anyone to think I meant to cause unease." "You will not speak of the Duchess's distress," Gideon said. His voice was not loud, yet the room went colder. "No one in this room will speak of her Grace with mockery, pity, or speculation. If any version of tonight's events leaves this house dressed as entertainment, I will know who considered my table a theatre." A few faces lowered at once. It was not a threat shouted in anger. It was worse. It was a duke reminding society that rank could close doors as easily as open them. Cressida's colour faded. "I only wore what I believed had been sent with kindness." Gideon looked at the pearls. Then he looked at her. "Remove them." Her hand tightened at her throat. "Here, now." The room held its breath. Mrs. Davenant fumbled with the clasp because Cressida's fingers had gone clumsy. The pearls came free strand by strand, pale against the companion's trembling palms. Gideon did not take them. He turned to the butler. "Mr. Hales, have those placed in the jewel cabinet under seal. Mrs. Rowley is to attend." No one else. The butler bowed so deeply that his relief looked almost like pain. "Yes, Your Grace, and send for Mrs. Rowley, Mr. Sloane, and the upper servants. The jewel cabinet is to be examined before midnight." Cressida's eyes widened. "You cannot think there has been wrongdoing." "I think," Gideon said, "that the Duchess's pearls were taken from a locked cabinet and placed around your neck without my wife's knowledge. That is wrongdoing enough to begin." For the first time since she had entered, Cressida had no graceful answer ready. The guests departed quickly, gathering shawls and dignity with equal haste. Within 15 minutes, the dining room had emptied of everyone except Gideon, the butler, Mrs. Rowley, the housekeeper, Mr. Osric Sloane, the steward, and the silent evidence of a dinner ruined by truth arriving late. Mr. Sloane appeared composed, his hair neat, his black coat brushed, his expression arranged into loyal concern. "Your Grace, I am at your service." Gideon picked up the silver keys from beside Beatrice's untouched glass. They were colder than he expected. "No," he said. "Tonight, you are at hers." They went together to the small jewel room off the Duchess's dressing chamber. Mrs. Rowley unlocked the outer door with a trembling hand. The cabinet inside stood polished, orderly, and apparently undisturbed. Gideon held the keys, but did not use them. "Open it," he told the housekeeper. She did. The lock turned smoothly, too smoothly. The shelves inside were arranged with exact care. Cases lay in their proper places. The velvet tray for the Wexham pearls was empty except for the indentation where the strands had rested for years. Gideon looked at the lock, then at the cabinet edges, then at Mr. Sloane. "There is no sign of force. None, Your Grace," Sloane said. "Then either Her Grace released them," Gideon said, "or someone had a key." Mrs. Rowley made the smallest sound. Gideon heard it. So did Sloane. The steward's gaze flicked toward her, swift and warning. Gideon's grip tightened around the keys until the pearl fob pressed into his palm. He remembered Beatrice placing them on the table. He remembered the sound. Silver against wood. Not surrender judgment. "Seal the room," he said. "No one enters without me." Then he turned to Mr. Sloane. "And before you answer my next question, remember that the Duchess left this house tonight because everyone in it forgot who she was." The steward bowed. A bead of perspiration shone near his temple despite the cold. Gideon looked at the empty velvet tray. "Who last opened this cabinet, Mr.?" Osric Sloane did not answer at once. And in that hesitation, Gideon heard the first crack in the beautiful machinery of his house. The jewel room was narrow and cold, lined with cedar cabinets, velvet trays, and small drawers labeled in Beatrice's neat hand. Everything bore the mark of her order. Even in absence, she governed the place better than he had governed his own judgment. Mrs. Rowley stood near the door, her face pale beneath her lace cap, while Mr. Hales held a lamp high enough for the empty pearl tray to glow like an accusation. Sloane adjusted one cuff, a gesture so slight that it might have passed for composure if Gideon had not been watching for fear. "Her Grace, Your Grace," Sloane said at last. "The ledger records that Her Grace authorized release of the pearls this afternoon." Mrs. Rowley's breath caught. Gideon turned his head toward her, but she lowered her eyes at once. "This afternoon," Gideon repeated. "At what hour?" "Shortly after 4 o'clock. "And you saw the Duchess give that instruction?" Sloane's mouth settled into a careful line. "I received the written direction through the proper household channel." "That was not my question." Silence closed around them. The lamp hissed faintly. Sloane bowed his head by a fraction, not enough to appear humbled, only enough to avoid insolence. "No, Your Grace. I did not see Her Grace write it." Gideon looked at Mrs. Rowley. "Did you?" The housekeeper's hands tightened in front of her apron. "No, Your Grace." "Then who brought the instruction?" Sloane answered before she could. "One of the lower maids, I believe. There was some confusion before the dinner." Her Grace had made several changes to the table. Gideon's eyes did not leave Mrs. Rowley. "Is that true?" She swallowed. "There were changes to the flowers, Your Grace, and to the second course, not to the jewels." Sloane's expression sharpened for half a second. It vanished quickly, but Gideon saw it. He had not become Duke of Wexham by missing the movement of men who lied over rent, land, or family pride. Yet somehow he had missed lies forming under his own roof, because Beatrice had been the one who usually noticed what did not fit. "Bring the ledger," Gideon said. "Now." Sloane inclined his head. "Of course, Your Grace. Mr. Hales will go with you." The steward's gaze flickered. "If Your Grace wishes." "I do." Gideon waited until both men left before turning back to Mrs. Rowley. The housekeeper looked older than she had an hour ago. "Speak," he said, her eyes lifted, startled by the brevity. "Your Grace, you almost did. Twice." A tremor passed over her mouth. I do not wish to accuse without certainty. I am not asking for accusation. I am asking for truth, Mrs. Rowley pressed one hand against the edge of the cabinet, as if the polished wood might steady her. Her Grace had not opened this cabinet in nearly 3 weeks. She said the pearls were too grand for a private dinner, and that Lady Cressida's presence made such display unwise. Gideon stood very still. The words were precise. Beatrice would have chosen them exactly, not jealous, not petty, unwise. She had seen the danger and arranged dignity around it. He had seen the danger and called it inconvenience, and yet the pearls were released. Yes, Your Grace, by a note. So Mr. Sloane said. Did you see it, Mrs. Rowley hesitated again, and this time Gideon understood that fear, not uncertainty, held her back. Only for a moment. It bore her Grace's hand. But her gaze dropped to the keys in his hand. But her Grace never wrote household instructions on loose half-sheets. She used the small cream note cards from her morning desk. The silence after that was different. It had shape, it had direction. Gideon looked at the empty velvet tray and saw, not pearls, but Beatrice's face across the dining table when she had said. She had become generous without knowing it. He had thought the remark was pain made sharp. Now he wondered whether it had been recognition. She had not merely been humiliated. She had known something was wrong. The door opened before he could ask more. Mr. Hales returned with the ledger, and Sloane followed with his composure freshly repaired. Gideon accepted the leather-bound volume and opened it beneath the lamp. The entry was there. Wexham pearls released by instruction of Her Grace. 4 o'clock. A signature below it looked so much like Beatrice's that for one disorienting instant his mind tried to accept the easiest answer. His wife had sent the pearls. His wife had staged the scene. His wife had turned grief into spectacle. The thought died almost before it was born. Beatrice had left the keys. No guilty woman would have chosen a symbol so devastating and so exact. Gideon closed the ledger. Where is Lady Cressida? In the blue guest chamber, Your Grace, Sloane said. Mrs. Davenant is with her. I thought it best that the lady not return home in distress, given the hour and the weather. You thought it best, only for propriety. Propriety was not well served tonight. Sloane lowered his head. Gideon handed the ledger to Mr. Hales. The pearls are to be sealed in the cabinet. The ledger is to remain with me. Mr. Sloane, you will attend me in the morning. Mrs. Rowley, no servant is to be dismissed, reprimanded, transferred, or questioned without my direct instruction. Relief moved across her face so swiftly that it looked like pain. Yes, Your Grace. Gideon left the jewel room with the keys still in his hand. He did not intend to keep them. He did not yet know how to return them. Lady Cressida received him in the blue guest chamber as if she had been wronged by the upholstery. She sat on a settee beneath a Chinese screen, a lace handkerchief in one hand, her companion beside her like a witness already prepared for court. Without the pearls, her throat looked bare in a way that made her seem less beautiful and more exposed. She rose when Gideon entered, but not quickly enough to suggest true alarm. Your Grace, she said, her voice softened into hurt. I had begun to fear you believed some dreadful thing of me. Gideon remained near the door. What I believe is still forming. Then let me help it form kindly. She gave a fragile smile. I would never knowingly insult the Duchess. You must know that. Do I? The question emptied the smile from her face. Mrs. Davenant fluttered forward. Your Grace, Lady Cressida has been most distressed. She believed the pearls were sent by Her Grace. I saw the note myself. Gideon looked at her. You read it, only the first line. What did it say? Mrs. Davenant blinked. It said that Lady Cressida might wear them tonight as a token of peace. I cannot recall every word. Yet you recall the meaning. It was quite clear. Cressida pressed the handkerchief to her lips. I thought Beatrice wished to show the room there was no ill feeling between us. I was moved, truly. I was, I told Mrs. Davenant. It was almost too generous. You call my wife Beatrice now. Cressida's eyes widened. Forgive me, I spoke thoughtlessly. I'm overset. You were not overset when you entered my dining room. Colour rose beneath the powder on her cheeks. I was trying to be brave, with another woman's jewels at your throat. With jewels I believed she had offered. Gideon took one step farther into the room. Cressida's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. How did you know which key opened the jewel cabinet? He asked. I beg your pardon. At dinner, when you touched the pearls, you looked toward the keys at her Grace's waist. Everyone saw the keys. She made certain we all saw them when she removed them. Before that, Cressida's breath changed. Only slightly. Only once. I don't know what you mean. Mrs. Rowley tells me the Duchess keeps the pearls in the jewel cabinet. The note, if it existed, could have told you the pearls were sent. It would not have told you the cabinet, the key, or the pearl fob. Perhaps someone mentioned it. Who? She looked toward Mrs. Davenant. The companion looked down. I cannot possibly remember every conversation in a house as large as this one, Cressida said, a tremor entering her voice with expert timing. You are questioning me as if I were a thief. I am questioning you as if my wife was humiliated in her own house. That silenced her. Not for long. Cressida's eyes shone suddenly, though no tear fell. Your wife has never liked me. She has always looked at me as though I was something left on the sole of her shoe. I tried to make peace. I accepted what I believed was an olive branch. Now she has turned the entire evening into punishment. The Duchess did not move your place card. Cressida froze. Gideon saw it. Your place card was moved from the middle of the table to my right hand. Who did that? I assumed her Grace had. Do not hide behind my wife's name again. The softness left his voice. Mrs. Davenant recoiled. Cressida went pale, but anger flashed through the pallor. You cannot mean to cast me out over a misunderstanding. You will remain tonight because sending you out at this hour would create more noise than truth, but you will not occupy any chamber connected to the Duchess's apartments. You will not enter her morning room, her dressing room, or any domestic office of this house. You will not wear the Wexham pearls again, unless the Duchess herself fastens them around your throat, and I advise you not to build hopes upon that possibility. Cressida stared at him. For the first time, her beauty could not cover her calculation. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, Gideon said. I begin with the note. He turned to leave. At the door, her voice followed him, thin but sharpened. She has left you, Your Grace. Do not make an enemy of the woman who stayed. Gideon looked back once. Lady Cressida, you mistake proximity for loyalty. Then he stepped into the corridor and closed the door on her silence. The house felt different now, not quieter, accused. Gideon looked down at the keys in his palm, at the pearl fob worn smooth by Duchess after Duchess, and understood with a coldness that settled deep in him that Beatrice had not abandoned the house. She had returned its judgment to him. Now he had to prove he was not too late to read it. Lady Theodosia Marcham opened her own drawing-room door before her butler could announce that the Duchess of Wexham had arrived, without luggage, without her husband, and without the keys that should have rung at her waist. Beatrice stood in the narrow hall of the Mayfair townhouse, with rain bright on the brim of her bonnet. Martha Pell, Behind her, clutching a small valise that had been packed in such haste, it contained more handkerchiefs than gowns. The hired carriage had already rolled away into the wet darkness. Gideon's footman remained across the street, beneath a lamp, not close enough to command, not far enough to abandon. Beatrice noticed that restraint, and hated that she noticed. Her aunt was 70 years old, straight-backed, silver-haired, and wrapped in a dark blue dressing gown, with the dignity of a woman who had outlived every man who once told her she was difficult. She looked at Beatrice's face, then at the empty place where the keys should have hung, and did not ask a foolish question. "Come in," Lady Theodosia said. "You are shaking. Only from the weather, of course. Weather has ruined more marriages than pride, pearls, and fools combined." Beatrice stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a softness that nearly undid her. For 3 years, she had belonged to a house where every door opened at her touch, and every room had still managed to feel borrowed. In her aunt's modest drawing-room, with its fading green paper, coal fire, and one sleepy spaniel lifting its head from the hearth-rug, she felt the first dangerous pull of safety. Safety was perilous. It invited collapse. She removed her gloves finger by finger and placed them on a table. "I need to leave London in the morning," she said. "Bath? Yes. Good. London will be chewing on this by breakfast." Lady Theodosia crossed to the bell-pull. "Martha will sleep in the small room beside yours. I will send for my travelling carriage at first light. You will not go anywhere like a fugitive. You will go as my niece, with a maid, a proper escort, and more dignity than this city deserves." Martha's eyes filled at the kindness, but Beatrice turned before the girl could see that her own had done the same. "Martha must not be blamed. For what? For attending me, for leaving, for any story, Mr. Sloane chooses to invent." Lady Theodosia's expression sharpened. "Ah, we have a steward in this, do we?" Beatrice went still. "I do not know. You suspect." "I suspect the house obeyed someone other than me before Lady Cressida entered the dining room." Her aunt studied her for a long moment. "And your Duke?" Beatrice looked toward the fire. A log shifted, sending up a small flight of sparks. "He followed me. That was not my question. He said he did not give her the pearls." "Do you believe him?" The answer mattered more than she wished it did. Beatrice sat because standing suddenly seemed too grand a thing. "Yes," she said at last. "I believe he did not place them around her throat. I also believe he allowed the world to think she had some right to stand close enough for such a lie to seem possible." Lady Theodosia's anger moved quietly, which was always its most dangerous form. "Then you will sleep tonight. Tomorrow you will write what must be written. You will not write from pain alone. Pain has dreadful penmanship." A faint, unexpected sound escaped Beatrice. It was not quite laughter, but it kept tears from becoming something larger. "Aunt, do not aunt me in that tone. You came to my door before you came to ruin. That proves there is sense left in you." Beatrice bowed her head. The pearls had been a public insult. The keys had been a public answer. Yet here, in a warm room that smelled of lavender, coal smoke, and old paper, the private wound opened more cruelly. She had not wanted to be worshipped by Gideon. She had only wanted him to see. When another woman crossed a line drawn through her heart. By dawn, Beatrice had not slept, but she had regained the particular calm that came when grief discovered work. Lady Theodosia's carriage left Mayfair shortly after 9 o'clock, with Martha inside, 2 trunks properly tied, and a groom riding behind. Beatrice did not look toward Wexham House as they passed the streets that would lead to it. She kept her hands folded in her lap and watched London thin into road, hedges, and pale April fields. The journey to Bath took hours, long enough for Martha's fear to settle into careful silence, and for Lady Theodosia to doze with her cane across her knees like a weapon. Beatrice used the time to compose sentences in her head. She would not accuse without evidence. She would not plead. She would not offer Gideon. The comfort of believing she had left in a fit of feminine temper. By late afternoon, Bath received them in a veil of soft rain, its pale stone terraces rising like something carved from restraint. Lady Theodosia's house stood on a quiet street above the town, smaller than Wexham House but warmer, with polished floors, clean curtains, and servants who looked at Beatrice with curiosity carefully disguised as respect. In the upstairs sitting room, Beatrice removed her travelling bonnet, asked for writing paper, and sat at a small desk near the window. The first letter was to Gideon. She dipped the pen, waited until her hand stopped trembling, and wrote in a clear, formal script. Your Grace, I left the household keys at Wexham House because I cannot administer a house in which another woman may appear before guests wearing the hereditary jewels of the Duchess, while my husband's first instinct is to preserve quiet rather than honor. I make no accusation concerning how Lady Cressida obtained the pearls. I state only that I did not send them, lend them, approve them, or consent to their use until the truth is known and publicly corrected before those who witness the injury. I shall remain under Lady Theodosia Marcham's roof. Beatrice Harcourt, Duchess of Wexham. She read it once. No tears blurred the ink. That satisfied her more than it should have. Will you ask him for anything? Lady Theodosia asked from the chair near the fire. No, not protection. He offered protection last night. Beatrice sanded the letter. I do not want protection that arrives after humiliation and asks me to be grateful for its lateness. Her aunt's eyes softened, though her voice remained dry. Good. That is almost uncomfortably sensible. The second letter was harder because it was for Martha Pell. Beatrice wrote a reference in her own hand, praising the girl's loyalty, discretion, skill, and moral character. She wrote it not because Martha wished to leave her service, but because a servant's future could be damaged by a master's anger in ways society never troubled itself to notice. When she finished, she folded the paper and held it out. Martha stared at it as if it were a jewel. Your Grace, I don't need that. You may never need it. That is why you must have it. I didn't do anything brave. You came with me when staying would have been easier. Martha's mouth trembled. It wasn't easier, not after what she did. Beatrice looked up. Lady Cressida? Martha glanced toward Lady Theodosia, then lowered her voice. I saw Mr. Sloane near the jewel passage yesterday afternoon, before dinner. He was not alone. The room changed. Even the rain against the window seemed to quiet. Beatrice set down the sealing wax. Who was with him? I could not see clearly, Your Grace. There was a veil. A dark mourning veil, though no one in the house was in mourning. I thought it strange, but Mr. Sloane looked at me so sharp that I went on before he could ask why I was there. Lady Theodosia sat forward. What time? Near 4 o'clock, my lady. I had gone to fetch the lace cap. Her Grace wanted mended. 4 o'clock. The same hour Beatrice had been checking flowers and table cards. The same hour some instruction had apparently released the pearls from a cabinet she had not opened. Beatrice felt no triumph, only cold confirmation that her pain had been useful to someone else. Before she could answer, the maid brought in the evening post on a small tray. Lady Theodosia took the top sheet, scanned it, and her face hardened. It appears London has found its appetite. She handed over a gossip sheet, folded to a marked paragraph. Beatrice read the lines without changing expression. A certain noble lady, long praised for her composure, is said to have departed her husband's table in a display of jealousy so theatrical that even seasoned observers were startled. Some whisper that a missing jewel clasp may have had more to do with the scene than wounded affection. Beatrice placed the paper on the desk. For a moment she saw again the dining room, Cressida's throat shining, Gideon's silence, the keys lying cold beside the wine. Then the image cleared. "So that is to be the story," Lady Theodosia said. "No," Beatrice replied. She reached for a fresh sheet of paper, her hand steady now. "That is merely the first version." By the time Beatrice's letter reached Wexham House, Gideon had already learned that a locked cabinet could lie more convincingly than a guilty woman. The note arrived shortly after noon, carried on a silver tray by Mr. Hales, whose face had settled into the grave neutrality of a butler serving a house in disgrace. Gideon had been in the small jewel room since morning with a locksmith from Bond Street, a narrow-shouldered man named Mr. Arkwright, who had brought 3 leather cases of tools and the gloomy confidence of a tradesman accustomed to aristocrats, believing polished wood could protect family secrets. The Wexham pearls lay sealed in a velvet-lined casket on the table. The cabinet stood open. Its lock, removed and placed under a magnifying lens, looked harmless enough to insult everyone present. "Well?" Gideon asked. Mr. Arkwright did not hurry. He had spent nearly 1 hour examining the brass mechanism, the keyhole, the wards, and the faint marks along the inner plate. At last he set down his instrument and wiped his fingers on a square of linen. "This lock wasn't forced, Your Grace." Gideon had expected that answer. It still landed cold. "Then it was opened with Her Grace's key." "No, Your Grace, not necessarily." Mrs. Rowley, standing near the door with both hands clasped at her waist, lifted her eyes. Mr. Hales did not move, but a tension sharpened through him. Gideon leaned closer. "Explain." "The original key would turn clean. This was opened by a copied key. A good copy, but not perfect. It catches here." Mr. Arkwright indicated a faint scrape inside the mechanism. "See this mark? Too fresh to be old wear. Whoever used the copy had to work it a little, perhaps twice." Gideon looked at the key ring resting on the table. The silver circle Beatrice had placed beside her untouched wineglass. The pearl fob lay against the wood, innocent as a closed eye. The Duchess carried the original keys until she left them at dinner. "Then the copy was made before last night," Mr. Arkwright said. "From wax or direct impression, most likely. Someone had access long enough to take a pattern." The room seemed to narrow around Gideon. A copied key was worse than theft in a moment of opportunity. A copied key meant intention. It meant someone had looked at Beatrice's authority, measured it, and made a private imitation. "Could a servant have done it?" he asked. "Any person could, given chance and nerve, but not without knowing which key mattered." The pearl fob caught the light. Gideon remembered Lady Cressida's eyes moving toward it at dinner. Not curiosity, recognition. Mr. Hales cleared his throat softly. "Your Grace, the Duchess's letter." Gideon took it. He knew Beatrice's handwriting. It had always been exact, composed, almost too restrained, as if even ink must behave itself for her. He broke the seal and read. Each sentence was formal, each sentence cut. She did not accuse. She did not plead. She stated that she had not sent, lent, approved, or consented to the use of the pearls. She stated she would remain under Lady Theodosia Marcham's roof until the truth was known and publicly corrected. before those who witnessed the injury. Gideon read the last line twice, publicly corrected. Not soothed, not hidden, corrected. Mrs. Rowley stood waiting with the stillness of a woman who had learned too much caution. Gideon folded the letter with care. Her Grace says she did not release the pearls. The housekeeper's expression changed by a degree too small for most men to notice. Gideon noticed now because he had finally begun to look. "You believed that already," he said. Mrs. Rowley lowered her eyes. "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" "Because Her Grace never used grand jewels to make peace with an insult. She used distance." The words were not impertinent. That made them worse. Gideon dismissed the locksmith with payment and instructions to hold himself available. Then he sent for Mr. Edmund Veilhart, the family solicitor, and ordered the household ledgers brought from Mr. Sloane's office. Sloane arrived, carrying them himself, dressed in the same immaculate black, his expression modestly troubled. "Your Grace, if I may say so, I fear this matter is being made heavier by Her Grace's distress. A household of this size often suffers errors." Gideon looked at him across the desk in the small estate office. "Errors do not wear coronet clasps at dinner." Sloane bowed his head. "No, Your Grace. Sit. I prefer to stand. I did not ask what you prefer." Sloane sat. Mr. Veilhart arrived within the hour, a compact man with iron-grey hair, calm eyes, and a solicitor's gift for making silence feel like a question. He read Beatrice's letter, examined the ledger entry, and then asked to see the household accounts for the last 6 months. Sloane objected only once. "Surely that is not necessary today." Gideon did not look away from him. "It became necessary when someone copied my wife's key." The review lasted into the grey edge of afternoon. No one raised his voice. That made the discoveries feel almost more brutal. First came a payment to a Bond Street jeweller under the Duchess's domestic account, dated 3 weeks before the dinner. The description was vague. Adjustment and clasp work. Gideon stared at it until the ink seemed to darken. "The Duchess ordered this?" Mr. Veilhart asked. Mrs. Rowley, who had been summoned again, answered before fear could stop her. "No, sir. Her Grace has not sent any jewels for alteration since Christmas, and that was a mourning brooch for Lady Theodosia." Sloane folded his hands. "Her Grace may not have informed the housekeeper of every personal matter." Gideon turned a page and found the second entry. A modiste near Hanover Square had been paid from the same account for a gown in sea-green silk. Beatrice had worn ivory, grey, and deep blue for months. He could not remember seeing her in sea-green. He could, however, remember Lady Cressida entering his drawing-room 2 months before, in a gown the colour of shallow water, laughing when Lady Fenwick said it made her look like a promised spring. Had made too early. The recollection sickened him because he had admired the gown without wondering who had paid for it. "This is not Her Grace's hand," Mr. Veilhart said, comparing the authorization marks. "It resembles it, but the downward strokes are pressed too hard." Sloane's lips parted slightly. "Many ladies write differently when hurried." "Many forgers do as well," Mr. Veilhart replied. Mrs. Rowley looked down, but not before Gideon saw fear and vindication move together across her face. He thought of Beatrice in Bath, writing with steady dignity, while London began to feed on the lie that she had fled in jealousy. He thought of all the small ways a woman could be erased before anyone called it cruelty. A place card shifted, a ledger altered, a jewel released, a husband silent. "Who approved these payments?" Gideon asked. Sloane placed one hand on the ledger as if he could quiet it. "The forms came through the Duchess's domestic channel." "That is not an answer." Your Grace, I manage dozens of accounts. I cannot personally remember every note. Then begin with this one. Sloane's eyes met his for the first time with something beneath obedience. Not fear exactly. Calculation. I would never knowingly misuse Her Grace's name. Knowingly is a careful word. It's the truthful one. Gideon stood. Sloane rose a second later, forced into it by rank rather than courage, until further notice. Gideon said, "No domestic account is to be paid without Mr. Veilheart's review. No note bearing the Duchess's name is to be honoured unless I have seen it. No servant is to be questioned by you alone." Sloane's face paled. "Your Grace, such restrictions may suggest mistrust. They are intended to." The steward bowed. He did it well, too well. After he left, Gideon remained beside the desk, while Mr. Veilheart gathered the papers into a neat stack. "You will need proof beyond suspicion," the solicitor said. "I know." "And Her Grace?" Gideon looked toward the window. Rain blurred the glass. Somewhere beyond that weather, Beatrice was in Bath without the keys, and yet every revelation in Wexham House seemed to prove that the authority had been hers all along. "Her Grace gave me proof last night," he said. She left. Mr. Veilheart said nothing. Gideon picked up the copied key report, the jeweller's entry, and the modiste account. Together, they were not enough to condemn anyone. They were more than enough to damn his own blindness. When he went back to the jewel room at dusk, the empty tray still waited in the cabinet. He placed Beatrice's key ring beside it, and looked at the pearl fob worn smooth by generations of women trusted to guard what men displayed. He had thought the house was under his command, because every servant bowed when he entered. Now he understood that command was not the same as care. Someone had stolen from his Duchess slowly, carefully, and in plain sight. The first theft had not been the pearls, it had been his attention. Gideon arrived in Bath at 11 o'clock the next morning, which was late enough to be proper and early enough to prove he had not slept. Lady Theodosia Marsham's house stood on a quiet crescent of pale stone, its windows washed by thin April sunlight and its brass knocker polished to a severity that seemed to judge him before any servant opened the door. He gave his card to the butler and waited in the entrance hall with his hat beneath one arm, feeling for the first time in years that rank could not force a door to open kindly. He had brought no carriage procession, no unnecessary footman, no sign that the Duke of Wexham had come to retrieve what belonged to him. Beatrice was not an object mislaid in Bath. He understood that now. Understanding did not lessen the fact that he had once behaved as though she were an arrangement that would remain where duty placed her. The butler returned after several minutes. "Lady Theodosia will receive your Grace in the front drawing-room. Not Her Grace. Not yet." Gideon followed him into a room that looked over the curve of the street, with pale curtains, a coal fire, and flowers arranged without extravagance. Lady Theodosia sat near the hearth, upright as a verdict. Beatrice stood by the window in a morning gown of soft grey, her hair pinned simply, her hands folded before her. Without the keys at her waist, she looked less adorned and more unreachable. Martha Pell was not present, but Gideon noticed a small work-basket near the chair, proof that Beatrice had not spent the morning collapsing into noble misery. She had been mending, writing, thinking, and enduring. That steadiness struck him harder than tears. "Your Grace," Lady Theodosia said, "you are punctual, that is something." Gideon bowed. "Lady Theodosia." Then he looked at Beatrice. "Duchess." Her face did not change, but he saw the tiny guard rise behind her eyes. "Your Grace." The title had once been ordinary between them. Now it was distance made audible. Lady Theodosia lifted her embroidery, though Gideon doubted she intended to make a single stitch. "You may speak. I shall remain until my niece asks me not to." "That is entirely proper," Gideon said. Beatrice's gaze flickered, almost surprised. Perhaps she had expected him to resent the chaperonage. Perhaps the man he had been would have done so. He removed a folded packet from his coat. "I came because your letter was correct. The pearls were not released by your instruction." Beatrice's fingers tightened once, only once. "You have proof? Not enough for the world. Enough for me to know where to begin." He placed the packet on the table between them. The lock was opened with a copied key. "Mr. Arkwright of Bond Street examined it yesterday. The original keys remained with you until dinner. The copy must have been made earlier." Lady Theodosia's needle paused above the cloth. A copied household key is not a misunderstanding. "No," Gideon said, "it is not." Beatrice did not approach the packet. Who had the chance? Someone with access to your key ring or to the room where it was kept. Someone who knew which key opened the jewel cabinet. That narrows it and widens it at once. Her voice was calm, but not empty. He had once mistaken her composure for lack of feeling. Now he heard the discipline beneath every word. "There is more," he said. "Mr. Veilhart reviewed the accounts. A jeweler was paid from your domestic account for clasp work 3 weeks ago. A modiste was paid for a sea-green gown 2 months ago. Both authorizations carry a hand resembling yours, but the solicitor doubts they are genuine." A faint shadow moved across Beatrice's face. Lady Cressida wore sea green in February. Gideon had expected the memory to sting. It did. "Yes. And you noticed the gown?" He looked at her directly. "Yes." The answer cost him, because it was small and damning. Beatrice turned her face toward the window for one breath. Outside, a carriage rolled over the stones, wheels striking rhythm into the silence. Lady Theodosia's eyes narrowed, but she did not rescue either of them from the moment. At last, Beatrice said, "How remarkable that my accounts have been more generous to Lady Cressida than my husband has ever been to me." Gideon accepted the blow. He had earned it before she delivered it. "I have restricted Mr. Sloane's authority. No domestic account will be paid without review. No note bearing your name will be honored unless I have seen it. No servant will be questioned by him alone. That protects the house. It begins to protect you." She turned back. "Beggins? Yes. I will not pretend it repairs what I failed to do." The words changed the air between them. Beatrice looked at him then, fully. "Why now?" she asked. "Because the key was copied? Because I finally saw the shape of the wrong done to you?" "No." Her voice remained soft, but the word stopped him. "That is not what I am asking. Why do you believe me now, when you did not defend me then?" Gideon had rehearsed answers during the journey. Each had sounded reasonable in the carriage. Each now sounded like cowardice, wearing grammar. He lowered his gaze to the packet on the table, then lifted it again, because she deserved his eyes with the confession. Because at dinner I chose silence. I told myself I was preventing scandal. I told myself that any public rebuke would make matters worse. But what I truly did was ask you to bear the injury so I could govern the room. I believed control was protection. It was not. It was convenience at your expense. Lady Theodosia's needle went still in her lap. Beatrice's face did not soften. That too he deserved. "You let her sit at your right hand," she said. "I did. You let her keep the pearls through the first course." "I did. You said we would discuss it after dinner," as if my humiliation were a matter to be scheduled. The memory closed around him with unbearable precision. "Yes. And now? Now I am asking you to return under my protection while I expose who did this." Her eyes changed, pain first, then something colder. "Under your protection." Gideon knew before she spoke again that the phrase had been wrong. "Beatrice, no, let the words remain as you chose them." She came away from the window, not toward him, but toward the table where the packet lay unopened. "You offer protection as though the danger is only outside me. Gossip, forgery, Lady Cressida, Mr. Sloane. But part of the danger was being expected to return the moment you decided the room was safe." "I did not mean that. I know what you meant. That is why it hurt less than it might have." That silenced him. Lady Theodosia rose with the faint rustle of silk. "I shall ring for tea. It will take the servants several minutes to remember where the leaves are kept." She looked at Gideon with dry warning. Several minutes only. She left the room, closing the door not fully, but enough. Beatrice stood beside the table. Gideon remained where he was. Propriety held them apart. So did history. "I want you safe," he said. "I was safe before I married you." He flinched, and she saw it. Her expression moved not with pity, but with regret that truth had teeth. "I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because I had a name, a room, an aunt, a small income, and no woman wearing my place in public. Marriage gave me rank and took away the right to object without being called jealous. I will correct the gossip. Privately? No." His answer came quickly this time, publicly, before those who witnessed the insult. "If the evidence allows, before those who repeated the lie." Beatrice studied him. "If the evidence allows. I will not build your defense on a weak foundation." Good. The word was quiet, but it was the first thing she had given him that was not entirely refusal. She touched the packet then, but did not open it. Martha saw Mr. Sloane near the jewel passage the afternoon of the dinner. Gideon went still. At what hour? Near 4 o'clock. The ledger entry was made shortly after 4. He was not alone. The fire shifted behind him. Who was with him? She could not see. The person wore a dark mourning veil. Gideon thought of Cressida's careful face, her knowledge of the pearl fob, her warning that Beatrice had left him. "Cressida asked me once about the keys," Beatrice said. "I had forgotten until your letter made remembering useful." What did she ask? Whether the pearl fob was merely decorative, or whether each Duchess of Wexham had carried it as proof that she ruled the house. She laughed when she said it. I thought it envy dressed as charm. When was this? 3 weeks ago, in my morning room. 3 weeks. The jeweller's payment. The clasp work, the copied key. Gideon felt the pieces move closer, not yet joined, but no longer scattered. "Will you write that down?" he asked. "Yes." Then she lifted her eyes to his. "I will help expose the truth. I will not return to Wexham House, because yous have discovered I was wronged." "What would bring you back?" The question left him before pride could stop it. Beatrice looked toward the half-closed door, where Lady Theodosia's voice could be heard giving unnecessary instructions about tea. "Not discovery," she said. "Not protection, not even apology." "Then what? A house where I am not restored like an ornament to the shelf after another woman has finished admiring it." Gideon had no answer large enough. He bowed his head, not as Duke to Duchess, but as a man finally recognizing the measure of a woman he had made lonely in a crowded house. "Then I will begin there," he said. Beatrice did not smile. She did not forgive him. But when Lady Theodosia returned with tea, Beatrice opened the packet at last, and Gideon understood that trust had not been given back to him. It had merely allowed him to stand in the room while it decided whether he was worth rebuilding. By the 3rd evening after Gideon's visit, Bath had discovered that a duchess could be absent from her husband's house and still be placed at the center of every conversation in town. Beatrice learned this not through open insult, for society rarely offered that mercy, but through glances that withdrew too quickly, pauses that grew too smooth, and women who lowered their voices just as she approached the subscription table at the upper rooms. Lady Theodosia had insisted they attend the charity assembly because retreat would only teach the world where to aim next. Beatrice had agreed for the same reason, though the grey silk gown she wore felt heavier than any jewels. Martha had dressed her without a word, smoothing the sleeves with the tender anger of a servant who could not challenge a duke, a mistress, or a gossip sheet, but could ensure her lady's hem fell perfectly. The assembly rooms were bright with lamps and crowded with Bath's careful respectability. Matrons sat like judges along the walls. Gentlemen gathered near the card-room doors. Young ladies pretended not to study Beatrice while studying nothing else. Lady Theodosia walked at her side with her cane, tapping the floor in a rhythm that made timid people move. "Chin up," her aunt murmured. "Not because they deserve it, because your neck is excellent." Beatrice almost smiled. "You are impossible. I'm necessary." That small warmth steadied her until Lady Aldbury, a woman with a face made for sympathy and a soul made for circulation, crossed the room holding a folded sheet. "My dear Duchess," Lady Aldbury said, "you are very brave to appear tonight." Beatrice looked at the paper in her hand. "Am I? After such cruel speculation, I mean." Lady Theodosia held out her hand. "Give it here before you sprain yourself with importance." Lady Aldbury flushed, but curiosity defeated dignity. She surrendered the sheet. Beatrice knew before she read it that London had improved upon its first lie. A noble duchess, once admired for her management of a great house, is now said to have departed her husband's table not merely from jealousy, but from fear of discovery. Sources close to the household whisper that a clasp from a famous pearl set had gone missing before the dinner, and that the lady's theatrical withdrawal may have been designed to draw attention from a domestic irregularity of her own making. No names were printed. None were needed. Beatrice felt the room tilt, though her body did not move. The words were clever. They did not accuse her outright. They invited others to do it for them. Missing clasp, domestic irregularity, jealous withdrawal. Someone had taken the humiliation of that dinner and shaped it into a noose made of manners. "Well?" Lady Aldbury asked, softly. "One hopes it is nonsense." Beatrice folded the sheet once along its crease. "One hopes many people are wiser than they sound." Lady Theodosia made a noise that might have been approval. Before Lady Aldbury could retreat, a gentleman near the card-room doors spoke louder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as loudly as he wished. Unfortunate business, if true. A lady with access to household jewels can make a great many things disappear before a husband notices. Beatrice looked toward him. She knew him only slightly. Mr. Percival Dane, a widower with an estate too small for his pride and a tongue too large for his judgment. The nearby conversations thinned. People did not gather. They merely stopped leaving. That was worse. Lady Theodosia's fingers tightened on her cane. Beatrice touched her aunt's sleeve before the older woman could speak. It was important, suddenly, that she answer for herself. "Mr. Dane," Beatrice said. He started, as cowards often did when the target turned toward them. "Your Grace, I was not aware you heard me." That is rarely the defense people believe it to be. A few faces shifted. Someone looked down to hide a smile. Mr. Dane stiffened. "I intended no offense." "Then you have failed by accident rather than design." I am not certain that improves the result. Colour rose in his cheeks. I only meant that servants' gossip is often smoke from some fire. And gentlemen's gossip? Beatrice asked. Is that smoke or merely fog? The silence that followed had teeth. Mr. Dane opened his mouth, then closed it. For one breath, Beatrice felt the strange, clean strength of having refused to be reduced to a paragraph in a sheet written by a man too cowardly to sign his name. Then another voice entered the room, low and unmistakable. Mr. Dane, you will apologize to Her Grace. Gideon stood in the wide doorway of the assembly room, travel dust still on the hem of his dark coat, and the authority of Wexham House gathered around him like a storm held under discipline. He had come without announcement. The sight of him sent a visible tremor through the room. Women straightened. Men adjusted their expressions into respect. Beatrice felt her heart betray her with one hard beat, not of welcome, but of recognition. Some part of her body still believed he meant safety. The rest of her remembered the dining table. Mr. Dane bowed too quickly. Your Grace, I did not intend. You did not intend to be overheard, Gideon said. That is not innocence. The apology came at once, stiff and embarrassed. Your Grace, I beg your pardon. Beatrice inclined her head. Granted as a matter of courtesy, not conviction. Gideon looked at her then. The whole room seemed to vanish from his face. He had travelled from London in haste. She could see it in the shadow under his eyes, in the absence of perfect polish, in the way he searched her expression, as if the gossip sheet had struck him physically only after striking her. He came closer, stopping at a distance that propriety required and injury demanded. Duchess, he said, I came as soon as the sheet reached me. Then London is efficient in its cruelty. Yes. Lady Theodosia stepped slightly behind Beatrice, not withdrawing, only yielding the centre of the field. Gideon's gaze dropped to the paper in Beatrice's hand. May I? She gave it to him. He read the paragraph. His face hardened with every line, but the fury did not comfort her as it once might have done. Fury was simple. Truth was harder. He folded the paper and turned to the room. This matter concerns a private misunderstanding within my household. I will not have Her Grace's name used for idle sport. The words were meant to protect. Beatrice knew that. The room heard a duke drawing a curtain over scandal, and several faces relaxed as though relieved to be spared discomfort. But Beatrice felt the old wound open with startling freshness. Private misunderstanding. The phrase placed a velvet cover over a public stain. It turned theft into awkwardness. It asked her once again to stand inside his control while her reputation paid the cost of peace. Gideon saw the change in her face too late. Beatrice, he said under his breath. She handed the gossip sheet back to Lady Theodosia. No, Your Grace. The quiet of the room deepened. He understood that tone now. She saw the instant he did. What would you have me say here? He asked, very low. That remains the difficulty between us, Beatrice replied. You still ask what will best govern the room. His jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but in recognition. I am trying to prevent further harm. Peace purchased with my reputation is not protection. The words did not carry far, but they did not need to. They reached him. That was enough. Lady Theodosia stepped forward. I believe we have subscribed enough money and supplied enough entertainment for one evening. She took Beatrice's arm. Gideon moved as if to follow, then stopped himself. The restraint was visible, so was the cost of it. Beatrice paused near the doorway. She did not look back at the room, only at him. I am returning to London. His eyes sharpened. When? Tomorrow. To Wexham House? No. To my aunt's house in Mayfair. It isn't safe for you to move in the middle of this. It was not safe for me to remain still. He absorbed that like a blow he had invited. Then let me send men to escort you. You may send one footman behind the carriage, if Lady Theodosia approves. You may not turn my return into a retrieval. His voice softened. I wouldn't. She wished that were entirely true. She wished he knew himself well enough to promise it without needing to learn through pain, then prove it by not asking again. Lady Theodosia drew her away before the room could gather another story from the space between husband and wife. Outside, the bath air was cold, clean and damp against Beatrice's face. Her aunt's carriage waited beneath the lamps as the footman opened the door. Beatrice looked once toward the building behind her, where music had resumed too quickly, as if scandal were a draught that could be shut out. They will say I fled again, she said. Let them, Lady Theodosia answered. Tomorrow you stop fleeing and start asking questions. Beatrice stepped into the carriage. Across the street, Gideon had followed as far as the portico, but no farther. He stood beneath the light, hat in hand, every inch a duke, and for the first time, visibly uncertain how to be a husband. Beatrice did not soften. Not yet. She sat back as the carriage moved, the gossip sheet folded in her lap like evidence. London had written its version of her. Now she would return and write the answer herself. Beatrice returned to London the next afternoon, not as a wife restored to her husband's roof, but as a duchess who had chosen the address from which she would fight. Lady Theodosia's carriage entered Mayfair beneath a pale sky crowded with smoke and weak sunlight, wheels passing within sight of streets that led toward Wexham House. Beatrice did not turn her head. She felt Martha watching her from the opposite seat, felt her aunt's hand resting on the silver head of her cane, felt the old pull of the house that had trained her to mistake endurance for belonging. Then the carriage continued past. Theodosia's Mayfair townhouse stood smaller, narrower, and infinitely safer than the ducal mansion. By 4 o'clock, Beatrice had removed her travelling bonnet, changed into a dark blue afternoon gown, and converted her aunt's back sitting room into a chamber of quiet inquiry. It had no grandeur. That helped. A modest fire burned in the grate. A writing desk stood near the window. On the table lay the gossip sheet from Bath, her own notes, the copy of Gideon's evidence packet, and a fresh stack of paper. Lady Theodosia sat in the corner with her embroidery abandoned in her lap, pretending not to watch every breath. You may still choose to let the Duke's solicitor handle this, her aunt said. I may, Beatrice replied. I shall not. Good. I was testing whether Bath had softened your head. Martha entered first, not as a maid attending a dressing room, but as a witness whose hands had not yet learned how to stop twisting together. Beatrice rose, which made the girl look more alarmed. Sit, Martha. Your Grace, I shouldn't. Today you should. Martha sat on the edge of the chair as if furniture might report her. Beatrice took her place at the desk and dipped her pen. You told me you saw Mr. Sloane near the Jewel Passage at about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the dinner. You said he was not alone. Yes, Your Grace. And the other person wore a dark mourning veil. Yes. Was she tall? Martha closed her eyes briefly, gathering the scene from fear. A little shorter than Mr. Sloane. Slender. The veil covered her face and most of her bonnet. I remember her gloves because one was grey, not black. It seemed odd with mourning. Beatrice wrote it down. Grey glove. Did she speak? Only once, she said. Be quick. The Duchess will be below soon. The room became very still. Lady Theodosia's needle stopped above the cloth. Beatrice kept her pen moving, because if she paused, The cruelty of that sentence would find too much space inside her. You are certain of the words? Yes, Your Grace. I thought perhaps it was a lady's maid borrowing something for a guest. Then Mr. Sloane saw me. He asked why I was loitering. I wasn't loitering. I had the lace cap. What did he do after that? He told me Her Grace disliked idle servants and that a girl with no family in London should be careful not to make mistakes. Lady Theodosia made a sound low in her throat. Beatrice's hand tightened on the pen. He used my name to frighten you. Martha looked down. Yes, Your Grace. Then we shall remove my name from his mouth. Martha's eyes lifted, startled by the softness of the promise. Beatrice folded the page and set it aside. You have done well, more than well. You were brave. I was frightened. Most brave people are. The next servant arrived under Gideon's protection, but not his command. James, the footman who had escorted Beatrice's hired carriage that first night, came with a note stating that His Grace had sent him only because Her Grace might wish to hear directly from those lower servants Mr. Sloane had made uneasy. The wording mattered. Beatrice noticed. She admitted James with Lady Theodosia present. He stood near the door, shoulders straight, eyes fixed somewhere above the mantel. I carried a parcel from the side entrance that afternoon, Your Grace, he said. Mr. Sloane said it was to go to Lady Cressida's companion. Mrs. Davenant. Yes, Your Grace. What sort of parcel? Long and flat, wrapped in brown paper. It came from a shop in Bond Street. The jeweller, Beatrice thought, or the modiste. Did you see the contents? No, Your Grace. But Mrs. Davenant opened the door herself. I saw dark cloth on the bed behind her. A veil, I think. He swallowed. Mr. Sloane told me after that I had not carried anything to the guest rooms. He said, if anyone asked, I had been polishing the lamps. Beatrice wrote each answer. Not quickly, not dramatically, precisely. Truth deserved better than haste. The second servant was a kitchen maid named Nell Price, so small and pale that the chair seemed to hold her up out of charity. She had carried hot water to the blue guest chamber after dinner had been dismissed. Mrs. Davenant had opened the door wearing a dressing gown, and behind her Nell had seen Lady Cressida at the writing table. She had papers everywhere, Your Grace, Nell whispered, and she was angry. Angry how? Not crying angry, thinking angry. Lady Theodosia gave a dry murmur of approval, a dangerous variety. Nell flushed. Beatrice leaned forward slightly. Did you hear anything? Only Mrs. Davenant saying Mr. Sloane promised the note would hold. Then she saw me and shut the door too fast. Beatrice's pen stopped. The note. Not a note. The note. She set the pen down carefully. Nell, did Mr. Sloane speak to you afterward? The girl nodded. He's said little maids who listened at doors often ended back in villages with no character. But I wasn't listening. I was carrying water. Of course you were. Beatrice folded the second statement and placed it atop Martha's. 3 women had been frightened into silence by a steward using the Duchess's authority as his weapon. It was a theft more intimate than pearls. Gideon arrived near dusk, properly announced, properly contained, and visibly angry in a way he had learned not to spend carelessly. Lady Theodosia allowed him into the sitting room, but did not leave. Beatrice was grateful. She did not fear Gideon. She feared the old habit of softening when he looked at her as though he had finally arrived where she had waited too long. He stood near the desk and read the statements one by one. His face changed at Martha's words. It changed again at Nell's. By the end, he held the pages as if they were something fragile and burning. I will have Sloane removed tonight, he said. No. Gideon looked up. No? Not yet. He threatened servants in your name. Yes. And if you remove him tonight, Lady Cressida will know precisely where the wall has cracked. She will repair herself before we can see what else she hides." He looked at her for a long moment. Once that look would have felt like resistance. Now it felt like a man learning the shape of a mind he should have honored sooner. "What do you propose?" he asked. Beatrice drew a fresh sheet toward her. "A small drawing-room meeting. Here first, or at Wexham House, once the proper witnesses are prepared. Lady Cressida must be invited, not summoned. She must believe she can still perform innocence." Lady Theodosia smiled thinly. "I do enjoy a polite trap." Gideon's gaze remained on Beatrice. "She is not harmless. No woman who wants another woman's place is harmless. I can protect the room. You may protect the door." His expression tightened, but he did not object. "And you?" "I shall ask the question." "What question?" Beatrice looked down at the statements, at the grey glove, the veil, the copied key, the note that would hold. Then she touched the bare place at her waist, where the keys no longer rested. The absence did not weaken her now. It pointed, the right one. Gideon took one step closer, then stopped before the movement became pressure. "Beatrice, I don't want you exposed to more insult." "Then understand me clearly. Insult grew in the dark because everyone thought me too well-bred to bring a lamp." She began writing the invitation in her formal hand. Lady Cressida Vale was requested to attend Lady Theodosia Marcham's drawing-room the following afternoon for the purpose of clarifying a matter of household misunderstanding that had, unfortunately, touched several reputations. The language was mild enough to be accepted and sharp enough to be understood. Gideon watched the pen move. She may refuse. She will not. Curiosity is stronger than caution in people who believe themselves clever. Beatrice sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with Lady Theodosia's plain seal rather than the ducal crest. That choice, too, mattered. She was not hiding behind Wexham. Not yet. When she looked up, Gideon's face held worry, admiration, and something quieter that she refused to name. "You could let me do this," he said. "I know, but you won't." "No." The seal cooled beneath her fingers. "I will not hide while others write my life." This time, he did not answer with command or protection. He bowed his head once, slowly, as if the words deserved ceremony. Outside, London's carriages rolled through the wet evening, carrying gossip from house to house. Inside, Beatrice handed the invitation to James and watched him leave with it. The first version of the story had travelled without her consent. The next would arrive by her hand. Lady Cressida Vale answered Beatrice's invitation by arriving 20 minutes early, which told Beatrice more than any refusal could have done. A guilty woman might stay away. A frightened woman might plead illness. A clever woman came before the room was ready and tried to change the shape of the battlefield. Lady Theodosia's butler announced her while Beatrice was in the back sitting room arranging Martha's statement, James's statement, and Nell Price's trembling account into a careful order. The moment the name was spoken, Lady Theodosia looked up from her chair by the fire. "Early," she said. "How vulgar." Beatrice folded the papers and slipped them beneath a plain blotter. Her pulse moved once, hard, then steadied. "She wants to arrive before witnesses. Then we shall disappoint her." But Cressida was not alone. Mrs. Davenant hovered behind her in the front drawing-room, dressed in lavender silk and anxious respectability. Gideon was already there, having come at Lady Theodosia's request to confirm the order of proceedings, and the sight of him standing near the mantel gave Cressida exactly what she had wanted, a room with the Duke, before the Duchess entered it. Beatrice paused just outside the partially open door. It was not eavesdropping when the subject was one's own ruin. It was survival with better posture. "Your Grace," Cressida said, her voice low and wounded. "I beg you to forgive the intrusion. I came early because I cannot endure another public misunderstanding." "Then speak carefully," Gideon replied. "Public misunderstanding has already done enough harm." "That is precisely why I am here." Cressida's voice trembled, but Beatrice had heard Martha describe the same woman as thinking angry. Now she listened for thought beneath the tremor. "I know her Grace believes I meant to insult her. I know the world has been cruel, but I have been cruelly used as well." "By whom?" Gideon asked. "By her pride." Mrs. Davenant made a faint protest. "Lady Cressida, perhaps you shouldn't." "No, Mrs. Davenant, I must. His Grace deserves truth." There was a rustle of paper. Beatrice's hand closed around the doorframe. "The Duchess sent me permission to wear the pearls. I did not invent it. I did not steal them. I did not know it would become a weapon." Silence followed. It lasted only a few seconds. But to Beatrice, it stretched like a corridor. She had walked too many times, always towards some room where she was required to prove she had not imagined her own injury. Gideon spoke at last. "You have this permission?" "Yes." The word was soft, triumphant, and afraid all at once. "I did not show it before because I wished to spare her. I thought, if she regretted the gesture, I would accept the blame. But now she has summoned me like a criminal. I cannot be silent while she ruins us both. Show it to me." Beatrice stepped into the doorway as Cressida drew the folded note from her reticule. Gideon turned at the sound of her entrance. The look that passed over his face was brief and unguarded. Warning, regret, concern. Cressida saw it and used it. "Duchess," she said, "I had hoped to avoid distressing you further. You have chosen a curious method." Beatrice entered fully, Lady Theodosia at her side. She did not look at the note first. She looked at Cressida's gloves. Pale grey, exactly as Martha had remembered. "Those are handsome gloves." Cressida blinked. "I beg your pardon. The colour suits you." "Her Grace has always had a gift for making compliments feel like accusations," Cressida said, turning back to Gideon. "Read the note, Your Grace." Gideon unfolded the paper. Beatrice watched his eyes move across it. He did not speak. That was the first wound. Then his gaze slowed. That was the second. The note must have been well made. Perhaps very well made. She saw his hand tighten slightly along the bottom edge, and although he did not accuse her, although he did not turn cold or distant, the smallest hesitation passed through him like a shadow crossing a candle. Beatrice felt it land in the exact place where his silence at dinner still lived. Cressida saw it too. "You recognize her hand," she whispered. "Any husband would." Gideon lifted his eyes. "Do not presume to instruct me on what a husband should recognize." The rebuke struck, but not fast enough to undo what had already happened. Beatrice came closer and held out her hand. "May I see what I am meant to have written?" Gideon gave her the note at once. That helped. It did not heal. The writing resembled hers with unpleasant intimacy. The letters leaned correctly. The spacing imitated her discipline. Even the capital B in Beatrice had the same restraint at the upper curve. Yet the words were wrong. Too sweet, too theatrical. "My dear Lady Cressida, in token of peace between us, pray wear the Wexham pearls tonight, that all may see there is no discord beneath this roof. Beatrice Harcourt." Beatrice almost laughed, not from amusement, from the insult of being counterfeited by someone who understood her hand but not her soul. "This is not mine," she said. "Naturally," Cressida replied. "You would say that now." Lady Theodosia's cane touched the carpet once. "Take care, Lady Cressida. You are in my house, and I have dismissed prettier liars for less." Mrs. Davenant fluttered. "My lady, surely there is no need for harshness. There is always need for accuracy." Gideon held out his hand for the note again. Beatrice returned it. Their fingers did not touch. She wondered if he noticed. She wished she did not. "Where did you receive this?" he asked. "In my chamber at Wexham House before dinner." "From whom?" "It had been placed on my dressing table." "By whom?" Cressida's lashes lowered. "I assumed by her Grace's direction." "You assume a great deal when it profits you." The color in Cressida's face deepened. "I was trying to mend a breach." "By wearing hereditary jewels no duchess had offered you in person?" Gideon asked. "Because the note said she wished it, because I trusted the duchess's written word." His face was hard now, but Beatrice had learned the danger of late hardness. Late hardness could still leave a woman standing in the cold while men discussed the weather of her humiliation. "Your Grace," she said. Gideon looked at her. "I do not ask you to decide here." The sentence cost her more than it revealed. "I ask only that you decide honestly." Something moved in his eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or shame. "I will have the paper examined." Cressida's lips parted. "Examined?" "By Mr. Veilhart. He will compare the hand, the paper, the watermark, and the stationer." "You would subject a private note to a solicitor." "I would subject a lie to daylight." "And if it is not a lie," she asked, "then daylight will not harm it." For the first time, Cressida looked less like an injured lady and more like a woman calculating the distance to the door. Lady Theodosia saw it as well. "Mrs. Davenant, perhaps your friend requires a chair." "I require fairness," Cressida said. "No," Beatrice answered quietly. "You require advantage. Fairness would have asked me before you wore what generations of duchesses guarded." The room stilled. Cressida turned on her, the softness gone for a flash. "You speak as if pearls can love you back." The ugliness of the sentence revealed more than she intended. Gideon stepped forward. "Enough." Cressida recovered too late. "I'm sorry. I am overwrought." "You are dismissed for today," Gideon said. "You will remain available for further questions." "Dismissed?" "Yes. From Lady Theodosia's house or from yours. Do not test the difference." Mrs. Davenant took Cressida's arm, and together they withdrew with curtsies brittle enough to break. When the door closed, Beatrice realized the room had not become easier to breathe in. Gideon still held the note. His hesitation had been brief. It had also been real. "Beatrice," he said, "I did not believe her. Not entirely." He did not deny it. That honesty was better than comfort and worse than she wanted. "The hand is close," he said. "Very close." "Yes, that is why I paused." "I know." He flinched at the calmness. "I should not have." "No. You should have trusted me quickly enough that she could see it." Lady Theodosia turned toward the window, granting them the mercy of looking elsewhere. Gideon's voice lowered. "You are right. The words were plain. No defense, no ducal polish." Beatrice wished they did not matter. "Send it to Mr. Veilhart," she said, "and send a note to the stationer named in your accounts. If the paper came through Wexham House, someone will have bought it." "I will." He slipped the forged note into his coat, as if it were something poisonous. Then he stopped near the door. "I failed the test before I knew it had begun." Beatrice looked at him, and for one moment she saw not the Duke who had silenced rooms, but the man who understood that a woman's trust could be lost in seconds and rebuilt only by inches. "No," she said. "You knew. That is why it was a test." He bowed his head once and left to send the note to Mr. Veilhart. Beatrice remained beside the table until his footsteps faded. Only then did Lady Theodosia speak. "Well, niece?" Beatrice touched the blotter, beneath which the servant's statements waited. "Now we know what she fears." "The note?" "No." Beatrice looked toward the door through which Cressida had gone. A question asked while she cannot choose the answer. Mr. Veilhart's answer reached Wexham House before breakfast, and Gideon read it standing beside the very desk from which Mr. Sloane had governed too much for too long. The forged note had been written on paper from the Wexham household stores, but not the cream cards Beatrice used in her morning room. It bore the watermark of a stationer who supplied Mr. Sloane's office for estate correspondence. The ink was the same iron gall mixture kept in the steward's locked drawer. The hand was excellent, too excellent. It copied Beatrice's discipline, without understanding where she allowed a letter to breathe. Gideon laid the report on the desk and looked at the steward, who stood opposite him in a black coat brushed to clerical perfection. Mr. Hales waited near the door. Mr. Veilhart sat to one side with his spectacles folded in one hand and a blank sheet ready before him. Gideon had arranged the room with care. No shouting, no theatrical accusation. Only doors closed, witnesses proper, and truth given nowhere to hide. "You will explain," Gideon said. Sloane looked at the paper as though sorrow, not fear, had brought him there. "Your Grace, I cannot explain what I do not understand. You understand paper. Many papers pass through my office. You understand ink, as does every clerk in England. You understand copied keys, altered, ledgers, forged authorizations, and servants threatened into silence under my wife's name." The steward's face lost a little of its polish. "Your Grace, I must protest the implication." "Protest after you answer." Sloane glanced toward Mr. Veilhart, measuring law, consequence, and survival in one narrow look. "If some servant has spoken rashly, perhaps, to please her Grace, I cannot be responsible for every frightened girl's invention." Gideon's hand closed over the back of the chair before him. He did not raise his voice. "Do not place my wife's name inside another lie." Sloane bowed his head. "Forgive me. No." The word struck harder because it was quiet. "Forgiveness is not your next concern." Mr. Veilhart opened his spectacles, placed them on his nose, and began calmly. "Mr. Sloane, I have here the jeweller's account for clasp alteration, Modesti's bill for Lady Cressida Vale's sea-green gown, the copied key report, the household ledger entry of 4 o'clock, and the forged note produced yesterday in Lady Theodosia Marcham's drawing room. I also have statements from 3 servants. His Grace has not yet placed these matters before a magistrate, or before the households most affected by your references. You may consider this your opportunity to correct the record." Sloane's lips thinned. "I served the House of Wexham for 11 years. Then you knew exactly what you betrayed," Gideon said. That at last pierced him. Not shame. Resentment. It flashed across his face before he lowered his eyes. "I was underpaid for what I carried," Sloane said softly. Mr. Hales stiffened by the door. Gideon did not move. "Continue." "Every great house rests on men like me, Your Grace. We prevent foolishness. We make arrangements. We ensure gentlemen need not soil their hands with the mechanisms of their own comfort. Yet, one is expected to remain grateful for a salary, a room, and orders delivered by ladies who have never counted coal in February. You chose Lady Cressida because she promised more." Sloane's mouth curved without humor. Lady Cressida understood usefulness. She purchased it. She rewarded it. "With what?" Mr. Veilhart asked. Sloane looked at the solicitor, then back at Gideon. "Money first. Advancement later. She believed her grace would withdraw from household management if her composure could be publicly questioned. A duchess who appears unstable is easily sent to Bath, to an aunt, to the country. A gracious companion remains. A necessary friend remains. The world forgives what is convenient when a duke does not contradict it. The words entered Gideon like cold water, not because they were clever, but because they were almost true. Cressida had trusted his silence before he had understood its value to her. "And the pearls?" he asked. Lady Cressida wanted a symbol too visible to be ignored. "You copied the key." "I arranged for an impression when the keys were left in the housekeeper's room during inventory. The copy was imperfect, but sufficient. And the note? I wrote the first draft." Lady Cressida improved the sentiment. She said her grace would never sound warm unless forced to. Mr. Hales made a small sound of disgust and mastered it at once. Gideon's fury did not rise hot. It settled, clear and hard, into decision. "You will write that down." Sloane stared. "Your grace. You will give Mr. Veilhart a signed statement of your actions, naming Lady Cressida's part, the copied key, the forged note, the payments, and the threats made to servants. If I refuse, then I begin with the magistrate, continue with every household that has ever received your character, and end by making certain no respectable estate in England confuses your neat handwriting with honor again." Sloane's face went grey. "Lady Cressida will deny it. She may attempt to." Mr. Veilhart dipped the pen and set it before him. "But she will do so against your signed statement, the stationer's paper, the jeweller's account, the altered ledger, and 3 servants who are no longer afraid of you." The silence stretched. Outside the office, a footman crossed the passage with controlled steps. Proof that the house was still functioning while its hidden rot was named. Sloane sat. He wrote. It took 40 minutes. Gideon remained standing through all of it. Each scratch of the pen felt like a door opening inside a house he had thought he owned. When Sloane signed at the bottom, Miss Veilhart sanded the page, folded it, and placed it in his case. Gideon rang once. "Mr. Hales, Mr. Sloane is relieved of all duties immediately. He will be given his personal effects under supervision. No reference will be issued except through Mr. Veilhart." Sloane rose unsteadily. "Your Grace, after 11 years, after 3 years of using my wife's authority as a mask for your ambition, you are fortunate. I still allow you a hat." The steward looked toward the door, then at the desk where he had once sat like a minor king. He bowed, but no dignity remained in it. When he was gone, Gideon stood in the emptied office and understood that dismissal was not enough. Sloane had been a hand, Cressida had been the will, and he, Gideon, had been the silence that made both bold. By late afternoon, he was at Lady Theodosia's Mayfair townhouse, with Mr. Veilhart's copies sealed in a leather case. Beatrice received him in the back sitting room, Lady Theodosia present, the servants' statements arranged at her elbow. She read Sloane's confession without triumph. That was one of the hardest things about her. She did not make his shame easier by enjoying the proof. "So it was planned," she said. "Yes, not a moment of envy. No, a campaign. And Lady Cressida believed I could be made to look unfit for my own household," Gideon answered carefully. "She believed society would accept it if I did not contradict it." Beatrice looked up. There it was again. The true wound beneath the pearls, the copied key, and the forged note. And would it have? He did not hide. Before that dinner, perhaps. Her face remained still, but the air changed. Lady Theodosia's eyes sharpened from her chair. Gideon forced himself to continue, "Not because you deserved it, because I had allowed too much closeness, Too much ambiguity, too much silence. I made your defense necessary by failing to make your position unmistakable. Beatrice folded the confession and set it down. What will you do? Invite the witnesses from the dinner to Wexham House, Lady Cressida as well. Mrs. Davenant, Mr. Hales, Mr. Valehart, and those whose testimony matters. I will correct the record before the people who saw the injury begin. That will humiliate you, yes. It will tell London that your household was deceived under your own roof. Yes, it will tell them. You let a woman's society called your mistress sit beside you while your wife was disgraced. Gideon took the blow without lowering his eyes. Yes. Beatrice rose and crossed to the window. The light touched the side of her face, revealing the fatigue beneath her composure. You could still bury it. Send Cressida away quietly. Dismiss Sloane. Let the gossip die slowly. And leave you to carry the stain while I carry the lesson. Many men would. Then I am late to a humiliation I earned. She turned back to him. For the first time in days, her expression changed before she could fully guard it. Not forgiveness, not tenderness, but recognition. He had said the costly thing and not asked to be rewarded for saying it. Do not make the meeting a performance of remorse, she said. No, do not speak over me. I will not. Do not return the keys as though they are a pretty ending. His throat tightened. They are not an ending. No, Beatrice said. They are a question. Gideon bowed his head. Then I will ask it properly. That evening, the invitations went out from Wexham House in the Duke's own name. Not requests, not apologies disguised as tea. A formal clarification concerning the events of the dinner and the honour of her Grace, the Duchess of Wexham. Across London, the same guests who had watched Beatrice leave with empty hands broke the seals and understood that the silence was over. At Wexham House, the jewel cabinet remained locked, the pearls sealed inside, and Beatrice's keys waiting beside them like a judgment not yet lifted. The drawing-room of Wexham House had been arranged with such restraint that its very elegance seemed accusatory. No music softened the air. No tea had been laid to pretend that this was a social call. The curtains were drawn halfway against a grey afternoon, and the lamps had been lit early, casting a deliberate glow over the chairs placed in a wide half-circle before the hearth. Gideon had ordered every detail himself, then changed 3 of them after asking what Beatrice preferred. That small difference had travelled through the house more swiftly than any command. Mrs. Rowley stood near the side table with Mr. Hales beside her, both dressed in their best black and both trying not to look at the closed jewel cabinet key box on the escritoire. Mr. Valehart sat near the window with his leather case at his feet. Lady Theodosia occupied a chair to the left of the hearth like a queen who had lost patience with lesser kingdoms. One by one, the original dinner guests arrived. Lady Fenwick came first, wrapped in violet silk and discomfort. Sir Alistair Mowbray followed, sober and pale. Mr. Percival Dane came because refusal would have looked like guilt, and because a duke's invitation in such a tone was not truly an invitation. Others entered with murmured greetings, lowered eyes, and the strained politeness of people who had enjoyed a scandal before learning it might require them to answer for their appetite. Beatrice arrived last from Lady Theodosia's carriage, not because she wished to make an entrance, but because Gideon had asked whether she preferred the room settled before she walked in. She had said yes. When Mr. Hales announced her, the room rose. The sound of chairs and skirts shifting was softer than applause and heavier than silence. Beatrice crossed the threshold in a gown of deep blue, with no jewels at her throat and no keys at her waist. The absence drew every eye. She let it. She had been looked at as abandoned, jealous, proud, unstable, and pitiful. Today, they would look at what they had helped make possible. Gideon stood near the mantel. For one moment, his gaze moved to the bare place at her waist. He did not flinch away from it. Then he bowed. Not a husband greeting property returned, but a man acknowledging the lady whose honor had summoned the room. Duchess. Your Grace. Her voice was composed. Several ladies glanced at one another, disappointed perhaps that public pain did not always arrive dressed as tears. Lady Cressida Vale entered 5 minutes later, late enough to suggest injury, not late enough to insult the Duke. Mrs. Davenant came behind her, pale as milk and nearly as silent. Cressida wore dove-grey silk, modest pearls of her own, and an expression so carefully wounded that it might have convinced anyone who had not seen ambition flash beneath the powder. She curtsied to Gideon, then to Beatrice. Your Grace, Duchess, I confess I don't understand why I have been asked here with such formality. Then the afternoon will not be wasted, Lady Theodosia murmured. Cressida heard, but wisely did not answer. Gideon waited until every person had resumed a seat. He did not sit. Beatrice remained standing near Lady Theodosia rather than beside him. That, too, the room noticed. Gideon allowed the noticing. It was part of the truth. You were all present at my table several nights ago, he began. His voice was steady, not loud, and it carried to every corner of the room. You witnessed Lady Cressida Vale enter wearing the hereditary pearls of the Duchess of Wexham. You witnessed Her Grace leave the dining room after placing the household keys upon the table. Some of you have since heard accounts suggesting that Her Grace acted from jealousy, temper, or fear of discovery. A stir moved through the room. Lady Fenwick lowered her eyes. Mr. Dane went red above his collar. Gideon looked at none of them with mercy. Those accounts are false. Cressida drew in a breath. Your Grace, surely, you will have the opportunity to speak. The words were mild. The command beneath them closed her mouth. Gideon turned slightly, not toward Cressida, but toward Beatrice. Before evidence is presented, I will correct one matter that belongs not to Lady Cressida, not to Mr. Sloane, not to any servant, but to me. Beatrice felt the room shift before he continued. People expected accusation. They did not expect confession. Gideon's face remained controlled, but there was no polish in his eyes now. When Lady Cressida entered my dining room wearing those pearls, I did not rebuke the insult at once. I told myself I was preventing scandal. That was cowardice dressed as judgment. My silence dishonored my wife before any gossip sheet did. Every person who saw Her Grace leave that room should know this first. The Duchess of Wexham was wronged under my roof, and I failed to defend her in the moment when defense mattered most. The silence that followed did not resemble the silence at dinner. That one had been hungry. This one was ashamed. Beatrice looked down at her gloved hands because, for one perilous instant, she could not look at him. He had not asked for forgiveness. He had made no bargain with his remorse. He had given the room his failure and let it stand. Lady Cressida was the first to recover, because panic moved faster than conscience. Your Grace, I am grieved that you would blame yourself for Her Grace's misunderstanding. I have said from the beginning that I wore the pearls only because I believed she sent them. Yes, Gideon said, you have said so. Mr. Valehart opened his leather case. The small sound of paper against paper made several guests lean forward despite themselves. Beatrice stepped away from Lady Theodosia. Before Mr. Valehart speaks, she said, I would like to ask Lady Cressida one question. Gideon turned toward her. He did not interrupt. He did not nod permission as though she required it. He simply made space. That restraint entered her like a quiet hand, steadying a door she herself had chosen to open. Cressida lifted her chin. Ask anything, Duchess. I've nothing to conceal. Beatrice crossed to the center of the room, stopping a proper distance from her. When you came to my morning room 3 weeks before the dinner, you asked whether the pearl fob on my household keys was merely decorative. Cressida gave a small, puzzled laugh. Did I? I ask many foolish things. I admire pretty objects. You asked whether each Duchess of Wexham carried it as proof that she ruled the house, a harmless curiosity. Perhaps. Beatrice's voice remained soft enough that everyone had to listen. At dinner, before I removed the keys, you looked at the fob as if it mattered to you. When His Grace questioned you afterward, you knew the pearls had come from the jewel cabinet. You also knew enough to accept a note claiming I had sent them, without ever asking why I had not given such an important instruction in person. Cressida's smile thinned. You are turning manners into evidence. No, I am turning knowledge into evidence. The room stilled further. Beatrice took one more step, not closer to Cressida, but closer to the truth she had carried from Bath to London, like a flame shielded by both hands. Who told you the pearl fob key opened the jewel cabinet when I never did? Cressida's eyes widened. Not much. Enough. Mrs. Davenant made a small, frightened movement behind her. Cressida recovered with a laugh that came half a second too late and a note too high. My dear Duchess, how could I possibly know which key opened what in so large a house? Servants talk. Guests notice things. You cannot accuse a woman because she saw you wear a key ring. I did not accuse you of seeing it, Beatrice said. I asked who told you what it opened. No one. Then you guessed. If I guessed at all, I guessed because it was obvious. Mrs. Rowley moved near the side table. Her face was white, but her hands were steady. Gideon saw her and waited. Beatrice saw her as well, and relief came not as softness, but as strength. The housekeeper stepped forward, holding a folded square of linen. Your Grace, she said, addressing Beatrice first, I beg leave to speak. The room drew breath as one body. Gideon's voice was quiet. Speak, Mrs. Rowley. The housekeeper unfolded the linen. In its center lay a small brass key, newer than the old silver household ring, its edges worn in one place where it had caught against an unwilling lock. Lady Cressida stared at it. Mrs. Davenant sat down suddenly, as if her knees had chosen honesty before her tongue could. Mrs. Rowley lifted her eyes to Beatrice. This was found hidden behind the lining of Mr. Sloane's private drawer, Your Grace. It is the copied key to the jewel cabinet. Cressida's laugh died entirely. Beatrice did not look away from her. Then we shall ask the question again, she said. And this time, Lady Cressida, you may wish to choose truth before it is chosen for you. For one suspended moment, no one in the drawing room seemed to understand that the small brass key on Mrs. Rowley's linen square weighed more than all the jewels Wexham House possessed. Lady Cressida stared at it as if outrage might turn metal into mist. Mrs. Davenant sat rigidly, both hands locked in her lap, her eyes fixed on the carpet. Mr. Percival Dane, who had been so willing to speak in Bath when Beatrice was not surrounded by proof, looked as though his collar had tightened by 1 full inch. Gideon did not move toward the key. He allowed the room to see it first. He allowed Beatrice to stand nearest the question she had earned. That key, Mr. Valhut said, rising with a paper in hand, was examined this morning by Mr. Arkwright of Bond Street. It bears the same imperfect cut that marked the lock of the jewel cabinet. It is not the original key held by Her Grace. It is a copy. Cressida lifted her chin. Then Mr. Sloane copied it. That has nothing to do with me. We shall come to Mr. Sloane, Gideon said. His voice was low, but the room heard the blade beneath it. Mr. Valhart opened his leather case and removed several documents with calm deliberation. The rustle of paper sounded almost indecent in the silence. The first matter is the note Lady Cressida produced yesterday, claiming Her Grace permitted her to wear the pearls. The handwriting imitates the Duchess's hand, but the paper bears the watermark used for correspondence from Mr. Sloane's office. The ink matches his private supply. The supposed permission was not written on Her Grace's personal stationery. Cressida gave a short laugh. A solicitor can make paper say anything. Lady Theodosia smiled without warmth. How fortunate, then, that paper appears to speak better than you. A few eyes dropped. No one laughed. Mr. Valhart continued. The second matter is payment. A Bond Street jeweller was paid from the Duchess's domestic account for work on the clasp of the Wexham pearls. That payment was authorized by a false signature. The jeweller has confirmed that the clasp was removed, copied, and refitted before the dinner. Gideon looked toward the side table. Mr. Hales stepped forward, opened a small velvet box, and revealed a tiny diamond clasp shaped like the Wexham coronet. The clasp Lady Cressida wore at dinner was not the original, Mr. Valhart said. The original had already been replaced, for safety, by the jeweller after Mr. Sloane attempted to retrieve it through a messenger. Beatrice absorbed the words without triumph. The insult had been more elaborate than she had imagined, and somehow that made it smaller. Cruelty often looked grand only while hidden. In daylight it became petty labor. Cressida's face sharpened. Mr. Sloane acted beyond himself. I cannot answer for a steward's greed. You can answer for this. Gideon took a folded statement from Mr. Valhart and held it where the room could see the signature at the bottom. Mr. Sloane signed a confession in my presence and before Mr. Valhart. He states that you promised him money first, advancement later, and protection if Her Grace were made to appear jealous, unstable, or unfit to govern the Wexham household. Cressida's composure cracked. He lies to save himself. He names the copied key, the forged note, the altered ledger, the payment to the jeweller, the payment for the sea-green gown, and the threats made to servants. Gideon's gaze did not waver. He also states that you wished to be seen as the woman this house obeyed when its Duchess did not. The room turned toward Cressida in one slow, brutal movement. It was not applause. It was not spectacle. It was society withdrawing the shelter it had lent her when she seemed useful and charming and safely cruel to another woman. Mrs. Davenant made a strangled sound. I told you it was too much, she whispered. Cressida turned on her. Be quiet. The words revealed enough. Beatrice watched the last softness leave several faces. Lady Fenwick closed her fan. Sir Alistair looked away in disgust. Mr. Dane stared at his shoes as if the pattern of the carpet had become morally urgent. Gideon stepped forward at last. Lady Cressida Vale, you will no longer be received at Wexham House or at Larkmere Abbey. Any household that asks why will receive the truth from me, not from rumour. Mrs. Davenant, you may depart with her today, but I advise you to consider carefully what you repeat and what you correct. Mrs. Davenant nodded rapidly, pale with relief at being offered a path that did not pass through further disgrace. Cressida's eyes shone now, but anger, not sorrow, brightened them. You would ruin me for pearls, Beatrice answered before Gideon could. No, you ruined yourself by believing a woman's place could be stolen, if the room was taught to laugh at her pain. Cressida had no reply to that. She curtsied, because etiquette remained when dignity did not, then walked toward the door, with Mrs. Davenant behind her. The guests parted without touching her skirts. When the door closed, the room did not release its breath. There remained the matter of the man who had allowed the first silence. Gideon turned to Mr. Hales. The butler brought a silver tray from the escritoire. On it lay the Wexham pearls, restored to their proper clasp, and the silver household keys, with the pearl fob worn smooth by time and women's hands. The sight struck Beatrice more deeply than Cressida's downfall. She had imagined the keys often since leaving them behind. She had not imagined the room watching them return. Gideon took neither object into his own hands. He let them remain on the tray, where no one could mistake them for a private gift. Before all present, he said, "I acknowledge that these pearls were taken from the Duchess without permission, and that these keys represented an authority I failed to defend. Her Grace did not abandon her duty. She refused to lend dignity to a house that had forgotten its own." Lady Fenwick's eyes filled. Mr. Dane looked as if he wished to vanish. Beatrice stood very still, while the old hunger rose in the room. This time not for gossip, but for absolution. They wanted her to take the pearls, take the keys, forgive the Duke, end the discomfort, and let everyone go home with a story of justice, neatly tied. She could not give them that. Gideon looked at her, and to his credit, he seemed to know it. "Beatrice," he said quietly, "I return them to you because they were always yours." She looked at the tray. The pearls glowed softly, innocent now and still unbearable. The keys rested beside them, familiar enough to hurt. "No," she said. The room went still again. Gideon's face changed, but he did not reach for pride. "No, I will not accept keys as though I were a housekeeper forgiven for leaving her post. I will not accept pearls as payment for humiliation." His throat moved once. "That is not what I offer." "Then say what you offer." He looked at her, not the room. "Public acknowledgement, not reward, not payment, not an attempt to purchase your return. I offer the truth that your authority in this house was real before I recognized its value. I offer the truth that I failed you, and I offer whatever time you require before deciding whether Wexham House deserves its Duchess again." The answer did not heal everything. It did something better. It did not pretend to. Beatrice stepped forward. She took the keys from the tray. The pearl fob settled into her palm with the cool weight of memory and choice. Then she looked at the pearls and left them where they lay. "Let them remain locked," she said, "until this house remembers what honor means." Gideon bowed his head. "Not deeply enough for drama, deeply enough for truth, as you wish." Mrs. Rowley's eyes shone. Mr. Hales stood straighter than before. Around them, the witnesses understood the shape of the ending they were not allowed to simplify. Beatrice had been cleared. Cressida had been exposed. Sloane was dismissed without honorable reference and bound for legal consequence through Mr. Veilhart's steady hands. But forgiveness had not been tossed into the room like sugar after bitter medicine. Beatrice closed her fingers around the keys and turned to Lady Theodosia. "I am ready to leave." Gideon's eyes lifted. "May I call tomorrow?" She considered him in front of the room that had once watched her walk away alone. "You may write first." A faint pain crossed his face, followed by acceptance. "Then I will write carefully." Beatrice walked out with the keys in her hand, not at her waist. Not yet. Behind her, no one spoke until the door closed. This time, the silence did not belong to shame. It belonged to a duchess who had taken back her name and left the house to earn the rest. Gideon's first letter arrived the next morning, and Beatrice knew before she broke the seal that he had obeyed her, not because the paper carried the Wexham crest, or because the hand was unmistakably his, but because he had not come himself. There was no carriage at Lady Theodosia's door, no footman announcing that his Grace wished to be received, no pressure dressed as devotion, only a letter laid on a silver tray, waiting to be opened or ignored. Beatrice took it to the window of her aunt's drawing-room and read it standing in the pale light. He did not beg. He did not praise her courage in a way that made her pain useful to him. He told her what had been done since she left Wexham House with the keys in her hand. Mr. Sloane had been removed under supervision, his character placed entirely in Mr. Veilhart's hands, and the matter of fraudulent household accounts had been put into proper legal order. Lady Cressida had departed London for a cousin's house in Kent, though several doors had already closed before she reached them. Mrs. Davenant had sent a written correction to Lady Fenwick, and Lady Fenwick, who loved nothing better than being first with a revised scandal, had carried the corrected truth through 3 drawing-rooms before luncheon. Near the end, Gideon wrote the only sentence that made Beatrice sit down. "I do not ask you to return because the house is quieter without its enemies. I ask whether, in time, I may learn how to make it worthy of your footsteps." Lady Theodosia watched her over the rim of her teacup. "Well, he has learned not to command in ink. A promising beginning. Men do sometimes improve when humiliated in front of adequate witnesses." Beatrice folded the letter carefully. "He asks whether I will travel to Larkmere Abbey next week." "With me?" "Yes, then he has learned more than one lesson." Beatrice looked down at the keys which lay on the table beside her. Since the drawing-room meeting, she had not worn them. She had carried them from room to room, set them near her writing-box, touched the pearl fob when thought required steadiness, and left them beside the bed each night like a question waiting for morning. "I do not know if I can forgive him," she said. Lady Theodosia's expression softened without becoming sentimental. "Then do not forgive him today. Go see what he does when forgiveness is not the price of your arrival." A week later, Beatrice entered Larkmere Abbey beneath a sky washed clean by spring rain. The Somerset estate rose beyond a sweep of gravel and green lawns, its old stone softened by ivy, its windows catching late afternoon light. It was larger than she remembered from her brief visits after the wedding, but less cold than Wexham House had become in her mind. Gideon stood at the foot of the steps, hat in hand, with no crowd arranged to witness his repentance. Lady Theodosia descended first, leaning on her cane and looking as though she had come prepared to inspect the moral foundations of the entire county. Beatrice followed. The keys hung at her waist for the first time since the dinner, but the pearls remained locked in London. Gideon's gaze lowered to the pearl fob, then returned to her face. He bowed. "Duchess, your Grace." The words no longer cut as sharply. That did not mean they healed. Inside the great hall, the Larkmere servants stood in formal order. The housekeeper, Mrs. Anstruther, an elderly woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes, stepped forward with a second key ring on a velvet cushion. "Your Grace," she said to Beatrice, not to Gideon, "the estate keys." Beatrice looked at Gideon. "You arranged this?" "No," he said. "I corrected it, Mrs. Anstruther knew what should have been done when you first came here as Duchess. I was the one who did not understand the omission." Mrs. Anstruther's mouth tightened, not with disapproval, but with restrained satisfaction. Beatrice took the estate keys. They were heavier than the London set. older, iron mixed with silver, made for storehouses, linen rooms, still rooms, and the practical life of a country seat. Their weight did not feel like burden this time. It felt like recognition. Gideon did not touch her hand. He simply stood beside her while the household bowed. That evening, he gave her the account books for Larkmere, the guest list for the summer, the names of tenants needing repairs, and the patronage papers for the village school and infirm charity. He did not present them as offerings meant to impress her. He placed them on the library table and said, "These should have been yours to review, not because I surrender responsibility, but because I should never have confused marriage with separate kingdoms." Beatrice turned one account page, "And if I disagree with you, then I will listen before I defend myself." "That may prove difficult." His mouth moved almost into a smile. "I'm relying on practice." The warmth of that nearly frightened her. Pain had made certain rooms inside her vigilant. A kind word could step into them too quickly if she did not stand guard. Yet Gideon did not press. He left her with the papers and returned only when Lady Theodosia rang for dinner. For 3 days, he did the same. He asked, he waited. He corrected a tenant matter she noticed. He thanked Martha Pell by name for her loyalty and increased her wages without making a speech of it. He wrote to Mrs. Rowley in London, confirming that no servant who had spoken truth would suffer for it. These were not grand gestures. That was why they mattered. On the 4th afternoon, rain kept them indoors, and Gideon asked if she would walk with him through the West Gallery. Lady Theodosia, seated nearby with a book she had not opened, said, "Leave the door open." "Of course," Gideon said. Beatrice almost smiled at his prompt obedience. The West Gallery was long and cool, lined with portraits of Wexham duchesses who looked down in silk, satin, lace, and painted patience. Beatrice stopped before a woman in dark green, one hand resting on a household ledger. "She looks tired." "The 5th Duchess," Gideon said. "She managed the estate through 2 bad harvests while her husband served abroad." Was she thanked? He was quiet for a moment. "Not in any record I have read. How familiar." He accepted it. They walked farther. At the end of the gallery, rain tapped the tall windows, blurring the lawns beyond. Gideon stood a careful distance from her. "I thought duty was enough," he said, "for the estate, for the title, for marriage. I believed that if I did not behave cruelly, I was behaving honorably." Beatrice looked at him then. "Neglect can be very well mannered." "Yes." His voice roughened. "I know that now. Knowing is not the same as changing. No, that's why I'm not asking you to believe me today." "What are you asking?" "To be permitted to keep proving it tomorrow." She looked down at the keys at her waist. The pearl fob had caught on the edge of her glove, and she freed it gently. "Forgiveness is not a door flung open once, Gideon. It is a threshold crossed honestly, day after day. Some days I may stand on one side of it and not know how to step. Then I'll wait on the other side," he said. "Not to trap you, not to hurry you, just to be there when you look." For the first time, she let the silence between them become something other than punishment. Months passed before Beatrice hosted her first dinner at Larkmere Abbey. By then the county knew the truth, not in the vulgar shape of gossip, but in the steadier form of consequence. Lady Cressida's invitations had thinned to almost nothing. Mr. Sloane's name had become a warning spoken by stewards who valued their posts. Wexham House in London ran under Mrs. Rowley's restored confidence, and Larkmere Abbey learned quickly that its Duchess noticed loose accounts, tired servants, damp cottages, and false compliments with equal precision. On the night of the dinner, Beatrice wore deep blue silk and no pearls. The keys rested at her waist, the pearl fob polished clean. No longer a wound hidden in plain sight, but a symbol she had chosen to carry again. Gideon stood to welcome the county families, and when the room had gathered, he said, "You are received tonight by the Duchess of Wexham, whose judgment now governs Larkmere with mine, and often improves upon it." A few guests smiled, some bowed more deeply than before. Beatrice looked at him across the candlelight and felt something inside her loosen, not break. Later, when the guests had gone, and Lady Theodosia had retired with the satisfaction of a general after a civilized campaign, Gideon found Beatrice in the gallery near the portrait of the tired 5th Duchess. "You did not wear the pearls," he said. "No, will you ever?" Beatrice touched the keys lightly. The question no longer hurt in the same place, when they no longer remind me of silence. Gideon stood beside her, not too close, close enough. "Then I'll spend my life giving them a better memory." She turned her face toward him. For a moment, all the rooms of the house seemed to breathe around them. Not healed entirely, not untouched by what had happened, but honest. Beatrice slipped her hand into his, and this time his fingers closed around hers, with reverence rather than claim. At her waist, the keys gave one small silver sound, not of departure, but of a door opening at last.